Are you ready for our next session, which is a radical change of pace, direction, tenor, theme, atmosphere? It's going to be about fashion, and it's called Reinventing Fashion. And it stars an old friend of mine named Christina Dean. Christina, please join me on stage, who is the founder of one of the oldest and top NGOs in the space called Redress. And she founded it in the Pearl River Delta in Hong Kong, where she lived for how long?
12 years.
12 years. And we were environmentalists together, and that's actually how I met her. And since then, and this NGO has been seminal in working directly with the industry, the garment manufacturing industry in the Pearl River Delta. Besides that, most recently, a couple of years ago, she founded a new business called the R Collective, which actually commercializes a lot of the advice that she was giving as an NGO. So she continues to maintain this dual presence in the industry as one of the top eco-warriors in fashion. She also has authored a book called Dress with Sense. So if you're ready for a big change of pace, let's talk about fashion, Christina. Now, crazily enough, Christina started off as a dentist. And you can't think of anything more distant and unrelated than dentistry. So start with your personal story and tell us, what led to that big career change.
Yeah, from dentistry to sustainable fashion advocacy is not your kind of typical leapfrog. And it came about because I think most dentists, if they were honest, might admit that they hate hurting people, and I was pretty quick to realize that. And so despite having qualified and started working, I hung up the drills pretty much pronto and retrained as a journalist. And I moved to Hong Kong in 2005 and was writing about all sorts of issues around environmental issues. I was pretty naive back then because I can't even remember my age, but I was pretty staggered by the pollution in Asia. I was raised in South Africa. I'm from Sussex, and I was just horrified by China's environmental landscape. And so the bridge for me around environmental concerns was public health. Having done my dentistry, I was like this really nerdy journalist, pain in the butt at press cons, like really looking for the story, honestly, so embarrassing. But really, I dug and dug and dug into the textile industry and its impacts on public health. And particularly, I still actually feel and I'm sure everyone in the room also feels very strongly around public health, that being the kind of moral imperative that we actually support the community who, in a bar, the passive smokers, I know that obviously it's not allowed around here anymore, and by a river, by a factory, in the soils downstream from factories, and of course in the air. So the fashion industry as a major, major polluter has an impact on public health. And so the reason that I got involved in this, because as a journalist, I couldn't find anyone doing anything about it to interview. And so I dug and dug and dug, and there was just nobody. So it was through a belly load of disgust that I started my work.
Okay, so the thin end of the wedge for you intellectually was public health. Now, what are some of why don't you sketch out for us the scope of the problem and the deleterious environmental impacts, which include public health on just globally?
Sure. So, the main problem with fashion is the way in which we consume, and it's pretty obvious we overconsume. And if you look over the last 20-odd years, we've doubled consumption and production, and in that same time, we've basically, we wear our clothes much, much less. And so essentially, we're now creating over 100 billion new garments a year. And so that in itself is leading to the crisis in statistics that we see around environment, because the production is just so enormous. And so some headline horrors are that the fashion industry generates around 10% of global CO2, and that's more than maritime and air, which is staggering. If you think about the awareness of air travel, and the advocates who suggest that we don't fly, which I agree with, but in the same breath, people are kind of missing the point that the fashion industry is actually generating 10% of global CO2. 20% of industrial water pollution is caused by textile dyeing and finishing alone. And so waste is the thing that possibly annoys me the most out of all of the fashion industry's negative impacts.
Now, what are the different, the fashion supply chain is really enormous and has different phases. So Why don't you just walk us through the sequence of making a garment and where waste and carbon
Yeah.
emissions take place?
Yeah.
That would be just useful for the average
Yeah,
person
okay,
to
so
think through.
in a nutshell, you've got synthetic fibers and you've got natural fibers, but essentially, forget about that. You've got to create fibers, and the creation of the fibers, whether you're taking them from polyester or from a field through agriculture, it's the processing of the fibers, which is both the most amount of CO2 and all negative environmental impacts. And so once you get fiber formed, that's when your waste starts. So you get fiber, you spin it, you weave it, you cut it, and then you retail it.
Okay,
and
when
then,
you say like process the fiber, so
Yeah.
you're talking about in a smokestack factory, which is because it's using. Tell us, what do you mean?
well, it could be, I mean, it depends on the types of fibers, because you can get fibers from trees, from polyester, from oil, etc. So it's the process by which the very, very raw material is heated, is spun, is created, its chemicals are put onto it to create a fiber. And from that fiber form, then spinning happens to sort of spin fibers together into a yarn. So coming back to part of your question, which is where does waste come from? Well, it comes everywhere along the supply chain. So you can literally, to the point you get fluff waste. I mean, that doesn't really keep me awake at night, but for some people. Yarn waste, fabric waste, cut, make, and trim. So when you cut a garment, clearly there's an unavoidable waste which comes around the shape of the garment. I don't lose sleep over that, because that's part of the process. But what I do, and sorry, just to finish the point, is that there's a lot of waste at retail, unsold inventory. That's a massive elephant in the room that the businesses don't want to, well, they certainly don't want to admit it.
Fabric,
for obvious
IP,
reasons.
IP also.
Yeah.
Fabric you had mentioned. You didn't mention fabric.
Fabric, yeah, my goodness. Fabric rolls. So to summarize, that there is industry waste, which is obviously caused by the industry, and then you have consumer waste, which is our waste, which you call post-consumer. And so the issue is, because we have basically gone nuts in the way that we as human beings wish to consume, the industry has lapped that up with delight, because it's worth a tremendous, 2.4 trillion USD annually. If you squish the whole fashion industry revenue into a GDP, I think it's the fourth or the fifth. It's one of those biggest GDP. So it's like this uncontrollable beast, which is making a lot of money for a lot of companies, of which I'm not going to go into capitalism and all that stuff. It's also creating a huge amount of jobs, which I very much think is a great thing. But it's allowed consumers to think of clothing in a very, very different way than we would have 20 years ago. And so because of that, you asked me about waste. It's just, there's waste coming all the way through the supply chain in every form.
Right. Would you say that it's actually in the composition of the carbon emissions?
Yeah.
Where is the majority coming from then? Is it with the factory, or before, or is it actually at the consumers, in the consumer's closet?
Okay, it depends if we're talking about your underpants or your winter coat, if we want to be straight, because it depends on how often you wash your clothes. If you want to say how much of CO2 is caused by the industry versus the consumer, it depends on the product that you're talking about, because obviously you wash your pants more than your coat. So I can just get to the point on that one.
So what garments actually are the most, actually create the most carbon?
Well, it's all to do with the raw material extraction. That's where all the carbon, well, it's not all, but most of the carbon is laid down. Now, life cycle analyses, which are basically, life cycle analysis, they analyze the life cycle of a product. The industry will find research that says, it's 50-50. 50% is the consumer, 50% is the industry. And that makes the industry feel really, really great, because it's 50-50. But again, that's based on your underpants being washed every 5 minutes and tumble-dried and dry-cleaned and lots of chemicals. So there's a way to twist this data to suit both sides. So to answer really firmly your question, and where I always come back to, it's the raw material processing, which is the real problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So are you saying that, let's say, because the circular economy is obviously one way to reduce waste on that front, if fiber could be repurposed, what's the state of technology Is that actually possible right now? Or
Yes,
where are we in
with the
making that
circular
happen?
economy?
Yeah.
Well, the circular economy, I mean, it's become like the knight in shining armor in the fashion industry, and you cannot go to one conference without most of the panels touting the circular economy, which would make you feel very, very optimistic, except for the fact that it doesn't really work in fashion right now. Globally, 9% of the global economy is circular, but in the fashion industry, it's less than 1% of old clothes go back into clothes. That being a very basic example of a circular economy. So whilst the fashion industry is, it's its only get out of jail card, really, is going to be the circular economy. And to answer your question, what that really, really means is that we have to find a recycling solution for all the post-consumer mess that we have all created. It's an absolute diabolical issue, the issue of clothing waste, because we're going through clothes like this. Every year, 73% of clothes that are made will either end up in landfill or incineration. So that's the most despicable linear economy that I've ever heard of. I'm sure there are worse. So 73% of what we make in 1 year, in terms of clothing, is landfilled or incinerated. So what we absolutely need to do, with hell-bent sort of urgency, is to find a recycling solution for post-consumer clothes. However, post-consumer clothes are really, really tricky, because if we just looked at everybody's clothes in this room, we're all wearing different fibers. We've got plastic, metal, we've got interlining, we've got polyester, tencel, lyocell, you name it, silk, wool, cotton, obviously. And basically, the reason that I say that is because you can't just chuck all these clothes into a pot and hope that you can extrude all those original fibers. And if anyone likes chemistry, the chemistry of our clothing is very, very complicated. So to answer your question about the circular economy, so I'm like a politician, I never get to the point, but I am getting there, don't worry. The point around the circular economy is that until we can recycle post-consumer clothing, there's not really a great circular economy that's actually going to happen. So there's loads and loads of research being done around the world to be able to separate post-consumer clothes. And essentially, it probably will happen, meaning scaling up. We could do it in a test tube, all the scientists are there. And there's definitely investment starting into new technologies, for sure, like 100 million here, 100 million there. So it's not enough investment whatsoever. But there are technologies for sure that should be able to be scaled up, but the investment is not enough, and the scalability of the technology is not really proven yet, but it's our only kind of get out of car jail, as I said. So perhaps if we could have a bit of magic and a bit of cash into these recycling businesses, then we will one day get there.
Okay, so now let's go to Redress, because with that as a backdrop and everything that you learned since, when did you found it?
2007.
Okay, 2007. So how did you start out, and what did you do? Like, what pain point did you decide to address with the NGO from its inception, and are you still working on that now?
So Redress is an NGO, and the first few years we were promoting sustainable fashion. I don't even know really what it is. And it was through, it's got apparently 50 definitions, whatever, but it's a very, very complicated term, sustainable fashion. So for the first 3 years, that's what we were doing. And we understood what we were doing, but we did a big project with the United Nations. And after that, I thought, I've got no idea what this is. Like, is organic cotton from, Peru better than, recycled polyester from Australia? I mean, honestly, it's not as straightforward as just yes and no, yes and no, yes and no. So as a result of that, we changed our mission in 2010 to only focus really on waste reduction and the circular economy. And the main reason for that was that I didn't really understand what was the best thing to promote in sustainable fashion. It was so broad. And secondly, having really been affected by Asia's fashion industry, I am continuously concerned about the textile waste crisis that is global, but is also very much Asia, because as it is today, which is kind of the same as it was 12 years ago, you've got the world's production going on in Asia. Still, China is the biggest exporter of apparel and textiles. You've got the world's fastest emerging markets, who are, 10 years ago, they weren't buying clothes. as much as they are now, and you imagine that disposable income, bang, bang, they're shopping like crazy. China is now the biggest domestic market for clothing. And so just those two things mean you've got the world's production, you've got the world's consumption happening in Asia. And so that is why we only focus really now on waste reduction and circular economy.
Okay. Now, are there what are the success stories in Asia? I mean, of course, you've worked with some gigantic manufacturers as well as some top designers. I know you can't reveal those because it's very sensitive that they're engaged in sustainability. I mean, tell us about some of these. And I want to also ask you, is Asia ahead because of the scale of its manufacturing?
Yeah.
I mean, vis-a-vis other regions of the world?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start with that one and go back if I remember the first question.
Sorry,
I'll do my best.
Questions. So, sorry.
So for me, I'm super, super pro-Asia, and I'm super, super pro-manufacturers. Not all of them, of course, but, the brand side or the buy side, they often, and many consumers also just go poo, 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 you Asian manufacturers, you cheats, you people doing all these dirty things, which actually does really, really happen. But the reason I feel very disappointed with that point of view is that I'll speak about China. The Chinese manufacturers, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of them, and including some right crooks. But there are some incredible manufacturers, the world's leading, who have, years and years of R&D. Their senior management, their leaders have got, PhDs, more PhDs than, I've had hot dinners, whatever the saying is. The leadership is amazing. You've got second and third generation leaders coming in who are all Ivy League educated. The leadership is honestly so phenomenal. I've been into factories where they've had armed bodyguards into the labs for the R&D section where, I've been allowed into one room, and let's just say there are 10 rooms. No one is ever allowed into all 10. The research that they're doing, because then you would know the whole secret. So the reason I say that is the level of expertise, the level of investment that these big gadillion-dollar worth businesses are doing is phenomenal. And so to that point, I'm wildly passionate about what the manufacturers can actually do, both mainly textile and garment, towards improving the fashion industry, much more so than the brands, who squeal and squeal and squeal about what they're doing. And the only reason that the brands can squeal about what they're doing is because the suppliers are doing it.
However, okay, so do you consider that, okay, why don't you also tell the audience a little bit about how manufacturing with some of these really great manufacturers is cutting down on waste? Like, what are some of the techniques that would be
Well, I'll give you some,
deployed?
I'll just give you a few. I think I'm going to talk about industry waste.
And some of the stuff that you did also through Redress that you pioneered.
Well, I'm going to talk about industry waste first, if I may, and then we might weed back. So basically, because I've been doing this for a long time, I've been super lucky that I'm able to speak to big industries, and through having 1,000 NDAs in place, I'm able to know, and our team, what sort of waste issues big industry has got, because they actually, the traditional way of dealing with waste, and right now I'm only going to be talking about IP-sensitive waste. IP-sensitive, meaning it's logoed, print, checked, striped, whatever, very distinctive marks where if you see it, you go, that's brand X, Y, or Z. And so I'm talking end of roll. When I say IP, I'm meaning things that are very obviously belonging to a brand. So traditionally, the easiest way to get rid of these materials is to incinerate them. And incineration is super, super cheap, which makes it such a wonderful way to get rid of fabrics. Because the alternative, which is what we do, is so difficult. So up until 2018, when Burberry was, if you remember Burberry, a journalist found the cost of incineration to write off some goods. Until such point, the luxury brands were having a whale of a time incinerating their excess without anyone finding out. And then post the Burberry issue, a lot of brands have, well, not many compared with how much there is, but they've basically said, many of them have said, we're not going to incinerate. So therefore, we have a massive issue on our hands because there is so much IP-sensitive waste that is out there, that is stuck in factories, and the waste is either on the roll or staggering amounts of finished garment waste. I'm talking like finished garment clothes that have not sold, particularly because of COVID. And quite honestly, brands overorder, overbuy. They never want to miss a sale. They buy and produce gigantic amounts of clothes, knowing that they won't sell them all. So what we have at the moment is an issue where the industry are far too terrified to incinerate, but they still do. not those who've promised not to. And we have a situation where we have an abundance of excess materials. So what we do, and we're very, very small, but what we do is we work with China and Thailand and Vietnamese suppliers and recyclers to take these end-of-roll printed IP materials, and we recycle it back into fiber, and then we spin, weave, and we make products out of those materials that we make. So what we do is we actually, poof, the IP has gone because we bring it back to fiber. So it could have been logoed with company A, B, C, or D. It doesn't matter. It's back to fiber, and then the brand,
Okay.
yeah. So that's what we're doing with a lot of the.
But
the
is
supply
that
chain.
only possible with certain fibers? Could you do that, like how synthetic versus noble natural fibers, for example? You know, what is the potential to actually repurpose existing fiber?
The luxury brands often have really lovely fabrics, so we don't touch polyester because they don't have a lot of branded polyester goods. So we tend to do mainly cotton and wool.
Okay,
and
so
silk.
that can be respun.
Yeah, it can be respun, but it gets, buggered in the process because we're dealing with technology that was invented like 5 million years ago, meaning old mechanical process like in Dickens' times, in industrial times here in England with these clunky old machines. That's still what's going on in the industry, which is pathetic. Given that you can send someone to the moon, we still can't, this goes back to the recycling problem. So what we do is we're still mechanically recycling these fibers, which basically means if you imagine, you make a smoothie for your breakfast, you put it all in, all the fibers get, you can't have fiber from a smoothie because you've just cut the whole thing up. The same thing happens when you recycle cotton. You cut the fiber down. So what comes out, a fiber goes in like this, and it comes out like this. And so you get a really crap yarn out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
That's technical terms, everyone.
No, I mean, yeah, just like a smoothie. Now, if I'm a consumer and a citizen, so if I'm a consumer, it's obvious from what you're saying that I should be buying clothes, hopefully, and it sounds like a very small number of companies do it, that are made out of repurposed textile waste. Now, are any brands doing a good job with that?
Yes, definitely. I mean, recycled polyester is basically everywhere. Gross overgeneralization, but I think the industry's really nailed recycled polyester.
Okay.
So that is mainstream. And the problem with that, if I may, and I'm sorry to always go to problems, but a lot of the recycled polyester in the fashion industry comes from plastic bottles and also fishing nets and stuff. And you go, yeah, that's amazing, that's amazing. Well, it's sort of not amazing in a way. It would be amazing if the recycled polyester from the fashion industry was going back into the fashion industry. But what the fashion industry is doing is it's grabbing plastic waste from the plastic bottle industry,
right.
where that would be best staying in the plastic bottle industry, because you all know microfibers. I don't think I really need to explain, but the problem, therefore, of taking these big plastic bottles is that we're putting them into clothes, and we all feel so damn good about that, and then we're washing them, and then we're leaching the microfibers from the plastic bottle into the ocean, and that is the end of it, because you can't get it out. So I still think recycled polyester is fantastic, brilliant. It's better than virgin, but it still has massive negative impacts. And then in terms of recycled cotton, that's been around forever. By the way, recycled cotton has been around for so long, and actually a lot of the brands have just been cheating us all, just chucking in all this rubbish cotton, chucking it all in, making yarn. And then this was years ago, we wouldn't have known we were wearing recycled cotton. It was just a cheap way.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Do you see what I mean?
Okay,
So
but it's a decades-old practice.
it's been
to
going on
save-
forever. Yeah.
Save on cost.
But it has a lower strength. And recycled silk is pretty new. And the chemical recycling is, as I said, going to hopefully give us better quality yarns. There's something called fiber to fiber. So if you want to recycle and be really technical about it, what we really need is fiber to fiber recycling, meaning what you put in is what you get out, and then no loss of quality, and then that would be amazing.
So, okay, you've painted a really dim picture, and it's incredible that you still keep on hammering away and that you've done it with your own business. Now, so it's really, it sounds like it's coming down to government legislation. I mean, it sounds like there's so much greenwashing, the consumer is confused by the thicket of issues and claims of sustainability. What actually needs to what would create a step change, do you believe, after working so hard in this industry?
Well, I think legislation around chemicals would be great. I'm not an expert on chemicals, but any legislation that toughens up on the filthy chemical use would be a great blessing. Sidetrack, I was with some super uber PhD researcher in China. He was just doing textiles, and I said, what keeps you up at night? And he said it's all the chemicals that we're not testing for. Because you have these, minimal, what do you call them? I've forgotten, there's the parts per million and all these like minimum points. He said, what we're not testing for is what we ought to be the most worried about. So the point to legislation is, yes, it works. If we can ban substances X, Y, and Z, whatever, it certainly helps. In terms of what would be a great outcome is an extended producer responsibility tax, which is touted about quite often. I think probably it'll happen.
How would that work?
It means like there's 1p tax per garment that the brand has to pay as a sort of fine, really, or as a sort of tax to generate funds for the end-of-life management. Because government spend, I don't know, I haven't researched it I'm not up to date with that country by country, but governments spend a sizable amount of money trying to deal with all of our old clothes. And all of our other crap, quite honestly. So this extended producer responsibility way is actually it's a small rap on the knuckle for the business to have to put a charge on the end of life. And this is a real problem that brands have at the moment, because they all make their clothes, they're all the cost of good, they're all working out, loads of money, nice little profit at the end. But they don't put in an end of life fee. So when it comes to the end of life, whether the end of life is within the business itself or whether it's really out there in a trash can, no one's pricing that from the drawing board in terms of the cost of good. So that legislation would be really good.
Okay. How about certification?
Certification is so damn thorny because it's very difficult to give a real stamp that means anything in the fashion industry when most brands, a lot of brands don't even know who their suppliers are. So why I say all of that is like getting a real certification from fibre all the way up to the garment and knowing that it's actually true and being able to test for that certification is really very difficult. And we've gone through, in my time in this area, which is like 16 years, there's been certifications popping up all of this, what are these? And the factories are going, what's this next one I have to do? And they do it like they don't want any more certifications because none of them, often many of them don't really work anyway. And the brands are not paid the additional money that they have to do to implement X, Y, and Z. So the reason I say all of that is that what the consumers want is a nice, easy way to understand the impact of their clothes. Wouldn't that be lovely? The problem is you're not going to get it because there's no easy way to work it out. So there you go. Like you can't even working out carbon, which is obviously like from a brand's perspective, dealing with carbon is like the real crux of the problem because they've got carbon reduction policies and targets, and countries have reduction targets in place. So, global multinational businesses are basically trying to reduce carbon, but to measure it is very difficult. So therefore, back in the day when I started this, I thought, why the hell are there not more certifications? Why can I not just know that this is a good piece of clothing? Because it's impossible to know. So don't hold your breath waiting for more standards and certifications because they're not really worth the the ink they're printed on, sorry.
Okay, so if I'm shopping, what should I do? I don't want to feel like despair, but I want to do better with my closet. So what is your advice? Because it sounds like it's difficult the industry is clearly failing.
Yes.
You didn't want to talk about capitalism, but obviously it's the wellspring of the problem. We won't talk about it. Nevertheless, if you want to do better and there isn't enough transparency, where can you look? What should you do then?
Okay, well, the first thing is, like, if you'd asked me 5-10 years ago, I probably would have said stop buying clothes. And then really, I actually really had a change of heart on that during COVID, when overnight we had a decrease in, well, actually fashion consumption stopped overnight in 2020 March. And that year there was a 34% global reduction in clothing consumption. And you would think, woohoo, that's fantastic. But what it meant was that the most disadvantaged people in the supply chain lost their jobs. And a lot of those are women, who then has a massive knock-on effect on their family, much more so than if a man comes out of work, because women actually give more of their $1 to their family than men. So why I say that is not shopping is not a solution. So that's an easy...
That's good. That's like we're allowed to eat beef after that sustainable food. That sustainable food session.
Yeah, so then with that in mind, it means that you've got to shop better. And so the easy answer is shop better, wear it for longer, and keep it in use. Shop better basically means buy better quality, and it also really means you have to spend more on the clothing. That basically means you've got to pay more. Because the problem is that the price point of most fashion is down in the gutter because of globalization and the way that multinationals have been able to really drill down that price. Many people are used to buying a top for like £5, £2. I don't know, like, Boohoo, who I've worked with. So, I mean, we can talk about that later. But Shein, gosh, I mean, they're really in the gutter as far as price point is concerned. So we're used to very, very cheap clothing, as is the case for food, actually. So to consume more ethically and responsibly, we have to buy better quality. But the easy way to do that is buying secondhand clothes. I mean, that's the easiest way forward.
How do you shop?
I only buy secondhand clothes.
Because she also is gorgeous, so it's easy. She could wear a towel and she would look fine. But, okay, so now I also wanted to ask you about fast fashion, because I think that maybe our generation is less guilty of it, and millennials seem to be so concerned about the environment. Have you seen any statistics which corroborate that? Or is it just BS and they continue to basically are buying a ton of fast fashion and their appetite for clothes seems unabated? Or things looking up because there is a generational shift?
I think if I answer the question so the question is fast fashion output, basically. Is it going to drop?
Or do you see also a cultural change? Because I think like this event attests to some change of going on. But I mean, have you seen any kind of positive consumer behavior change in the last few years? Because it's much more mainstream. Now you see that practically every consumer product is touting itself as sustainable, especially fashion. Fashion was the first one to actually flog this message aggressively.
Well, I'm thinking about this really tough UBS report that I read last year, which was about 500 pages, and it said essentially that there is at the moment absolutely no evidence that people are stopping how they shop in terms of fast fashion in relation to volume, in relation to concerns about the environment. So what that really means is that there's definitely, I'm really concerned about the environment. I'm really, really concerned about it. I'm really concerned. But basically that's all that happens really in terms of total volumes of consumption of fast fashion. Now, I don't recall, and I don't think the report actually explained that it may be that your millennials in the West may have gone more individual and cool and funky, and they don't want to look like everybody else, and they also care about the environment, blah, blah, blah. And then you might just have that Jakarta's just gone nuts and they're shopping like crazy. So that's a global snapshot, that there is no decrease in consumption based on ethical concerns to do with ESG-related concerns about the environment. So that said, I think that the climate marches, I think I've been in many, many meetings with industry, and they are quite freaked out about the next gen, particularly around of carbon.
Excellent.
Yeah, and actually carbon, if you ask most consumers around their concerns around fashion and the environment, it's linked to carbon. Okay. And actually, this is old data, and I can't even remember if this was true a couple of years ago, but a lot of the environmental protests in China are around carbon.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
actually, the Chinese
Yeah.
millennial is actually among the most forward-thinking when it comes to climate change.
Yeah.
Now, to leave the session on a positive
Okay.
note, however,
Yeah.
Christina was recently asked, our collective, which is a consultancy assisting industry to reduce waste, was asked recently to set up a whole new fashion industry that could genuinely be circular. So tell us about that and what would be required in order to make that happen.
Well,
And then and compare it to where the traditional legacy industry we have.
Well, I think to make the whole fashion industry circular, everything goes back to the drawing board, meaning that all fibres would need to be separated. So you have synthetics on one side and and natural fibres. If we start with two systems that can regenerate, well, then we have a hook. The problem is that these fibres are pretty much always blended, so we're locked in together. So if we want to start again, we separate all these fibres and we never, ever mix them up. And that from there on in, we put a shed load of cash into recycling and consumer awareness and education, and you don't allow the price point to go down as low as it ought to be. You slap on some extended producer responsibility, and I think theoretically, we might even get there.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So it would be investment in this circular system, but you think that the blending of the fibers is one of the original problems?
Massive.
Kind of like fertilizer for farming. So did everyone also get this big message? It was like the obvious analogy to farming, that we have cheap food. You'd say that in the case of these cheap synthetic, the blended fibers has caused this kind of this is actually the root of the problem practically. Now I want to open up the floor to questions. Please.
How much have you seen?
Sorry. Yeah, wait for the mic, please.
How much have you seen the impact of climate change feed into the fashion industry? Because I went to Ahmedabad and to Gujarat in 2019, where they'd had such a terrible problem with drought, and it had really impacted and made them actually rethink. It came about after the earthquake, but also a lot of the popular fashion people had pulled out. And there was some really positive things happening there, whereby they'd cut out the middle men, and the women had set up cooperatives charging more for their work, but actually they could do that. Now they weren't paying for somebody else in the chain. And it seemed a really good way forward for them to clean up their act, because they could, with the dyeing, had to make use of less water because they had so much less. And actually in the process there, they had recreated things which had reverted back to indigenous cotton as well, which they'd stopped growing. So it was a really interesting story, pulling in a lot of those things which you hear very little about in other areas. Have you seen anything like it happening?
Well, there's probably a lot that that's been going on the ground. I don't quite understand, sorry, your point around the middleman. So I'd need to understand that a bit better, sorry.
Because of the earthquake, a lot of their productivity had to stop. And when they sat back and worked out how little they were being paid, there were people like yourselves who were actually quite savvy entrepreneurial women who'd gone in there and said, well, if you're going to restart production, why are you selling to these people at this price when you could be selling as a cooperative yourselves? And they actually, a lot of them came from the fashion industry in the UK. So they were working for brands like Wallace and others then. And they set them up to do more of this, bringing in more income to the household and actually putting an edge on their product.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that might coincide with just different buying patterns and access to market that also might have happened at the same point as the earthquake. I don't know which earthquake this was, but I would answer the question more from a corporate side, meaning that the big corporates are already experiencing the impacts of climate change in terms of the pricing, the sort of disruptions, the volatility in their raw materials and in their manufacturing. So, where there are floods, droughts, or power surges, or maybe power surge is the wrong example, where there are disruptions to the supply chain manufacturing, that's where they're experiencing, let's just say floods. And also the cost to cotton production, where climate change is affecting the droughts or floods. Let's just use these basic examples, fundamental examples rather. So the price of cotton is fluctuating because of climate change. So already, for sure, those who are buying a lot of cotton are already seeing the price volatility around the impacts of cotton production. So I'm sorry, I didn't quite answer your exact question about the buying patterns. Yeah.
Next question. Go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to ask about the role of repairing clothes. So obviously, these days you buy a garment, it gets a rip or something, it costs as much to repair as it does to just buy another one. I've even been to a repair shop where the bloke said, don't bother, just get another one. So should we all be learning to sew and darn socks?
Definitely. Well, I mean, clothes are not really designed even to be repaired much these days. Back in the day, we used to have a larger seam allowance. So if you got a fat ass, basically, you could sew it in and out, whatever to get to the point, if you don't mind.
That's funny. You go. It's not a PC conference. Okay. Go on.
No, I'm teasing. I mean, what I'm saying is, obviously the seam allowance was designed from the very, very get-go such that we could go in and out as we do. But many clothes today, the cheap ones, are designed so badly, the fabrics are so bad, the stitching is so bad, the buttons and zippers are absolute rubbish, so they're very difficult to repair. So whoever that was, it was a bit of a silly thing to say because it is still worth repairing. So a long time ago, about 15 years ago, I organised a conference and this woman from the government came from the garment constituency. And I was so damn proud that, we were only like a tiny baby, and someone from the Legislative Council government was going to come and talk about policy, and I was like, oh, ask her. Anyway, I got chatting to her on stage, and she told me this long story about how, she was going for a walk, and this woman had patched her bottom with the skirt because she'd had a slit in her skirt, and I was so disappointed. I said, I was thinking, what a pathetic thing to say. I thought you were going to talk about policy. But really, the argument was around consumers' responsibility to actually take ownership for their goods and to take good care of them. That's really what she was saying. And so definitely clothing repair skills, have gone out the window. Most kids don't know how to, thread a needle. And I once did a project, in a nutshell, where for a whole year I lived out of a dumpster of clothes, filthy, dirty, ripped, disgusting clothes, and I did it in order to prove that clothes had a lot of fashion life yet to give. And so 1 month I went in and I only took out ripped, broken, just slightly broken clothes, and I took them to tailors or I mended them myself, and it was a campaign just to raise awareness about that.
Please.
I feel awful about my un-PC comment. Will you forgive me for that?
It's okay.
Is that all right?
So my question really links some of this morning's themes about food, and that is, do you think it's true to say that a lot of the reason why we have so many clothes is because our weight goes up and down, which has something to do with a poor diet and maybe the food industry?
Well, I mean, it could be. I used to know the stats on how many clothes end up in landfill because of fit, because of fluctuating size, but it's gone out of my brain. I mean, I think it may be true for women around pregnancy who yo-yo, obviously, like 3 stone up and down. There's a lot of clothes that end up in landfill because of poor fit, and that's basically because consumers shop online. They've got no idea what size they are, so which is not answering your question. But I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that...
I remember a tweet from Tony Juniper saying about more than half the stuff in his wardrobe is there because it doesn't fit, shall we? For whatever reason. So, and it's the same with me, and it's the same with a lot of people I know.
Well, they don't know their size probably, and the biggest cheat, if you want to have Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it depends also how tight your clothes are to start with. I think most of us have got 10% to go. We could fit in 10% maybe, or maybe not. I really don't know the answer to your question, I'm sorry. But I would also say, for those people who want to look good, which is probably all of you, apparently the best way to look good in terms of making your clothes look luxury and all of that is to make sure that they fit. Nicely fitting clothes will last longer and all of that.
Gentleman up there.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. I've been working with a number of new fashion brands and distribution platforms. The definition of sustainability seems to evolve around moving production out of Asia to Europe. Mm-hmm. Is that enough for you? that a Portuguese manufactured or an Italian
Yeah.
fabric, if you like, gives greater sustainable credibility to a product
Because it's produced in...
because it's produced here in Europe rather than in
Well,
Asia.
I mean, if anything, number one, calling it sustainable fashion because it's produced in Italy or Turkey or Portugal, as you said, definitely doesn't cut the biscuit. Is that what you say?
The mustard.
Cut the mustard.
yeah.
It's cut the biscuit now.
Cut the biscuit.
All right, we've coined a new one. But to answer your question, why to me that sort of structure is more sustainable is because it's sustainable is not the right word. Speed to market. If you say speed to market, people go, oh, that sounds really, really awful. But speed to market is extremely important because you can respond much quicker to the consumer, what they're buying, what they want, if you need to replenish sizes. So that is better than shipping the garment from Asia, and that's why they overproduce, over-order. So for me, onshoring, I know it's not really onshoring, particularly in the States you'd call it that, but bringing the production closer to the market, it is better in terms of waste, that being shipping as well as responsiveness. But just because a fabric is created in Italy, let's just say, doesn't mean it's any better than it was made in China. Because also the other little slippery problem is that basically 90% of all fibers basically are somehow processed through China. So even if the last bit of the fabric, oh, it's made in Italy, isn't it fabulous, beautiful? Well, the fiber still came from China, no doubt. So it's never as simple. It's like when you sew the label on and suddenly it's made in Milan and you slap on another 20% for that. But it's so therefore, I'm obviously not speaking about your brands there, sorry, but it's not, it's not,
Question.
yeah, it's, so,
There's one more question.
yeah, it's a big pun, yeah.
Number of new platforms that are being set up, which are concentrating on reselling clothing and or hiring out clothing from your wardrobe. Is that for you something that's sustainable as a sustainable solution?
Yeah, I think the resale market is a brilliant market, and it's absolutely exploded in recent times because of technology and because of consumers' growing sort of awareness and ability to resell and to buy secondhand, etc., third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand. So for me, that's definitely yes, yes, yes. Obviously, there's some logistics involved in that, which is packaging. Depends how far it's being shipped. So absolutely pro resale, and then with rental. I'm pretty pro-rental because, again, it's extending the product's use phase, and therefore one assumes that it is reducing consumption. You assume that, but you've got no clue. And the obvious issue with the rental market is the logistics and the dry cleaning. So Rent the Runway in the US is the biggest customer for dry cleaning in the whole of New York. And so, there's always a double-edged sword of something that sounds wonderful, the rental economy, etc. But I'm still pro it because I still think, the sharing economy is, ever since Airbnb, it's like the biggest, exciting concept to come up with. And the sharing economy for clothing is also a wonderful solution. I think it just depends in the hands of whom are we doing it. It's like, people always poo-poo fast fashion consumers, but there are people with so much money who consume luxury goods as if they're fast fashion. So you can never quite really pinpoint in whose hands are we talking, because I could rent 2 different outfits a day, wear them for 5 minutes, and then off they go for dry cleaning again. Yeah.
Okay, on that note, so buy less, buy better, repair, and what else would you say?
And I'd also just say, engage with fashion because it is a vehicle to some of the greatest development that these economies can actually have in emerging markets. And if we could do that with our eyes wide open, we can actually steer a very powerful industry into something beautiful. And that's really why I do what I do, because I believe that it is a beautiful industry that can give great joys and blessings to a lot of people.
Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, thank you very much.